A very good morning to you. Welcome to our CITE Online. This is the CITE View. My name is Brighton Ncube. It's a show that looks at political issues and current affairs and stuff happening in Zimbabwe and beyond. And today on the show, we want to look at the issue of child marriages, what's been happening in the country, the campaigns done by Amnesty International Zimbabwe in terms of curbing child marriages. And joining me this morning is Gender and Intersectional Justice Campaigns Officer, that's Rachel Jambo from Amnesty International Zimbabwe. Good morning to you, ma'am. Welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Bright. How are you doing?
I'm very well, ma'am. This topic has been on the lips of many people in terms of child marriages. I've seen many stories, shocking stories happening in Zimbabwe. Maybe break it down to us. What are child marriages?
All right. Okay. Thank you. So, child marriage generally refers to any formal, be it civil marriage or an informal union between a child and an adult. Then if we look at the Constitution of Zimbabwe and if we look at the Child Amendment Act of 2023, a child is defined as a person who is under the age of 18 years old. So a marriage involving anyone under the age of 18 years old is deemed a child marriage.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for that. But in terms of your own work from Amnesty International, what are the causes of child marriages? You've seen in the rural areas, children dropping out of school. What are the chief causes of child marriages in Zimbabwe?
All right, thank you, Bright. So I think maybe to start off, we need to set the tone by just putting it out there that no child volunteers themselves into marriage. Neither does a child, based off of what I just shared now, no child has the legal capacity to consent to marriage. Rather, all of these young girls are victims of either circumstance or society. And in our line of work, what we've seen as the major drivers of child marriage, they can be categorized into three sections. There's religious factors, societal factors, and economic factors. Most child marriages, like you rightfully mentioned, occur in rural communities as well as in economically marginalized households. So we found that these child marriages are mainly driven by, if we're talking about in the religious and cultural practices, we know that we have cultural and religious practices that propagate or promote child marriages and in line with their church doctrine. That's number one. And then number two, in terms of our society, we know that teenage pregnancies are viewed as a taboo. It brings shame on a family, it brings shame to the community. So what we've seen is a lot of cases where I don't know if you've seen the latest statistics from, I think, 2023. These are the latest statistics that we have. That report coming from the Ministry of Health and Childcare outlined that from January to June 2023, there were about over 6,000 pregnancies recorded of children below the age of 10 to 14. And then in the same time frame, over 50,000 pregnancies were recorded. Children aged between 14 and 18. So what that basically means is a lot of these young girls are then forced into marriage because it's shameful for you to be a single mother. It's shameful for you to be pregnant and still be living in your parents' house. Statistically speaking, 34% of girls in Zimbabwe are married before the age of 18, and that's a huge contradiction to 5% of boys that are married under the age of 18. And it goes back to show that a lot of these unions or a lot of these marriages are occurring between underage girls and grown men. So again, that's a very, very big problem. We also identified poverty as being a major driver towards child marriages. Many girls, especially in the rural communities that are highlighted, many girls are viewed as cash cows or quick loans that can be sold off at any point in time to the highest bidder. It's a very sad case for the International Day of the Girl Child commemorations Amnesty held last year in Chipatsura, that's in Manicaland. We were engaging with young girls from Chipatsura Primary School, and the consensus, this is stories coming from the girls themselves. They were sharing that at home, if there's no money, we know we as girls are going to be sold off into marriage in order for our parents to raise money. So I think the current economic landscape in Zimbabwe is definitely also contributing to the spike in child marriages.
Yeah, maybe allow me to draw more on the issue of religion. I spoke about religion earlier. I want to say that's a chief cause again of child marriages. What have you been doing to engage religious leaders in terms of this amnesty to try to engage these leaders from the religious sector and curb child marriages?
Okay, thank you for that. So I think to start off, Amnesty acknowledges that religion plays a significant role in propagating child marriages. We know that there's certain religious practices that encourage girls to be married off to young men, and you hear phrases like it's for spiritual guidance, it's in keeping up with our church doctrines, but we know that some religious sects are at the forefront of this, and they don't work in isolation, they work within a system, because a child cannot be married off in a church setup without the consent or the contribution of parents and guardians. So we've seen that it's a whole system that is being used to abuse children. And so basically with Amnesty International, what we've been doing, we have a campaign, it's called the End Fistula, Restore Dignity campaign. This campaign also has a section that touches on child marriages. And what we've been doing is entering these different communities and raising awareness of child marriages as a form of gender-based violence, raising awareness of the human rights impact of child marriages, because what we understand is it never ends in just the lobola ceremony. It never ends in just the wedding ceremony. Child marriages is the start of a lifelong cycle of human rights abuses. If we're talking about a 14-year-old girl, it means her right to education is being infringed. She's not going back to school. If we're looking at maternal mortalities, some of the latest statistics that we've gotten from UNICEF is that our maternal mortalities, which is the rate of women and girls that die during childbirth, what is being recorded is that 1 in every 3 of those deaths is being recorded being a child who's under the age of 18. Then we also have the issue of maternal morbidities, such as obstetric fistula, which is an injury that happens during childbirth. A lot of these cases are arising from religious sects because, first of all, they don't believe in medically assisted births. That's number one. So you have a lot of cases of children dying in church shrines. I think we've got some very prominent cases that shook the airwaves a few years ago. We have the case of Memory Machaya. She was 14 years old, and she died in child labor. We have Nokutenda Waramba, 15 years old, dying in child labor. So again, it goes back to what I was saying. It's a system where parents and the church are coming together to infringe on the rights of children. And I think that's something that we're working towards, raising awareness so that people know, parents know, the children themselves know. If we equip the children with their basic human rights knowledge, they're also able to make a stand for themselves.
Right, thanks so much, Rachel, for that. We're raising very important issues there, the issue of consent as well, in terms of our Constitution of Zimbabwe. Are you happy with the way the courts have dealt with these issues, with these cases? I've seen a number of kids are dying in terms of shrines, as you say, others are dropping out of school as well. Are you happy with the way court cases have been dealt with in terms of child marriages in Zimbabwe?
All right, thank you for that question. That is a very topical and critical question. I think I'll just start off by saying, as Amnesty International, we acknowledge and commend the work that our government and the different line ministries and our judiciary has been doing to date to ensure that the girl child is both empowered and protected. I mean, there's so many developments that have happened over the last few years. I'll start off with the Constitution. We know Section 78, Section 26, and Section 54, they work together as checks and balances to ensure that child marriages are unconstitutional. And how they do that is by basically setting the age of consent to 18 years old. From the Constitution, we move on to the Marriage Act. The Marriage Act was recently aligned to the Constitution to set again that legal age of consent to marry to 18 years old, which is something we definitely commend. However, even though we celebrate this, there's still the question that remains, how about informal unions? Not everyone is taking a minor to a civil court, for example, because if you are getting married in a civil court, you need to register your union, and registering, the process of registering your union requires identification. And if the registrar is seeing that this person is under the age of 18, they cannot marry you. So the Marriage Act will then exclude those that enter into informal unions. Then someone would then go and ask, how about the Customary Marriage Act? Surely it should be covered in there. So again, I'll commend that currently our country recognizes that all informal unions, or rather customary marriages, also need to be registered. And I think it's a very good starting point to ensuring that all unions are registered, to ensure that everyone is of the legal age to be married. However, lobola is not an official requirement for the validity of a customary marriage, and it continues to be a driver of child and forced marriages, because if it's conversations that are happening between two families, lobola is paid off, the girl child is sent away, and there's no checks and balance in between to ensure that that young girl is protected. And then last but not least, we have the recent Protection of Children and Young Persons Act, which was passed last year. I think it was July 2024. It basically aligns the age of sexual consent to the Constitution. Before, it used to be sexual consent was put at 16, but now it's been aligned to 18 along with the Constitution. So what does this bill mean in effect? It creates crimes that include sexual activity with a minor, as well as extramarital sex with a minor. So while the Act criminalizes any sort of sex between an adult and a minor, there's still massive gaps in practice. Like, despite the existence of the Act, minors are still being married off in religious and cultural circles without impunity. So what do we mean? I know this is a lot of technical jargon I'm using here, but what does it mean practically speaking? It just means despite all these provisions being in place to protect children under the age of 18, there's still people in certain that use the freedoms of the religious practices to still propagate child marriages, and they do so without any impunity. How do we address this? How do we balance freedom of expression to express your religious practice on the one hand versus what is in the best interest of the child? What is the government doing to protect and uphold the best interest of the child? More so, what recourse is available under this act for victims of child marriage? That someone who was married off at 14, now maybe she's 16, the act has been put into place. Will there be any specialized courts and mechanisms to dissolve these marriages? Will these children receive any kind of restitution and therapy to overcome the struggles that they went through having been married off at a very young age? So yes, there's a lot of good that's been happening, but also on the other side, there's still a lot of gaps that need to be addressed.
But the aspect of poverty and culture, we spoke about that earlier on to say these are the chief causes of child marriage, the aspect of poverty and culture. What can you say are some of the cases we've dealt with as Amnesty in terms of going to a community, finding out in Napa here, the family is marrying off a young child to a wealthy guy who want to take care of them? Any other case like that we've come across?
All right. So yes, definitely, we hear a lot of these cases in the communities that we work with. But I think I'll start off by just putting out a disclaimer that Amnesty International, we're not working explicitly on cases of child marriages. Rather, our focus area with our campaign is to focus on issues to do with access to sexual reproductive health by adolescents, and minors or child brides fall into the bracket of adolescents. So a lot of our work, like I mentioned earlier, is centered around human rights education, and our model seeks to equip community at a community level, both the children, the parents, and the leaders, be it religious leaders or community leaders, to equip them with basic sexual reproductive health education and human rights education in an attempt to equip them with the skills to demand more from their duty bearers, in a quest to equip them with the skills to call out injustice when they see it in their communities.
But also, any measures done by the government to try to address these? If we try to engage the government as well to try to address the issue of child marriages, we've seen the high rise of school dropouts, young girls dropping out. Over, I think 1,000 last year dropped out of school from rural areas, and over 1,000 from urban areas. Any measures coming from the government to address this?
Right, so I think that also falls under our advocacy work. Like I mentioned, we do have opportunities whenever we can to engage with members of parliament, to engage with the Ministry of Health, to engage with the Ministry of Education. I know currently there is a policy that's been put in place to ensure that should a child fall pregnant and they give birth, there's mechanisms in place to allow the girl child to go back to school and continue their education. That is on paper. Policy versus paper, they're two different things. In practice, what we're hearing and seeing from the communities is that after a child gives birth, even if they do come back to school, there's still the stigma associated with being a young teen mom. Many of them won't even want to go back to school based off of the stigma they receive at the school setup and in the community. So I think what is needed, all these other mechanisms, is trying to treat the symptoms of the root cause. What we need is for the root cause to be addressed. And we do try our very best to engage our relevant duty bearers. We share our research, we share our data from the communities in the hopes that we can push motions, stronger and more effective motions, to protect the girl child.
Briefly, take us through the campaigns that you've been doing as Amnesty, trying to curb child marriages. Take us through the campaigns briefly, what you've been trying to do to end child marriages in Zimbabwe.
All right. Okay. So like I mentioned, the campaign that we're currently running is called End Fistula, Restore Dignity. It is a campaign that is seeking to show the intersectionality between lack of access to sexual reproductive health and abuse of human rights, and as well as child morbidity such as obstetric fistula. So if I could just briefly, if you'll just indulge me to just briefly get into what obstetric fistula is, it's an injury that occurs during childbirth because of prolonged labor and also because of not having any medically assisted childbirth facilities. And we see this with, and how we then channel that into our campaign and get our messaging across is with child marriages. When you're young, your body is not equipped to, first of all, to carry full-term pregnancy, and then secondly, to give birth. So we're raising awareness of this to say, listen, child marriages and obstetric fistula and human rights, it's a cycle. It keeps going on and on. It's a cycle, and it needs the attention of duty bearers at the top, and then also the community at the mid and lower level. So we do a lot of human rights education. We equip our community members with human rights education, specifically relating to sexual reproductive health. It's not just in child marriages that fistula occurs, it's even amongst teens, because I know some of the statistics that you mentioned, a lot of those pregnancies, they're not just as a result of child marriages, they're also as a result of intergenerational sexual activity that is happening amongst adolescents. It's an uncomfortable subject that a lot of people, especially parents, don't want to talk about, but the reality is our young children are having sexual intercourse at a very young age, and we need to put measures in place to protect them. The traditional approach of abstain from sex is not working anymore. They're doing it either way. So we now need provisions in place that will allow our young children to access critical sexual reproductive health services in a timely manner at an affordable rate. So that is all also incorporated in our campaign. Mm-hmm.
Guys, if you're just joining us this morning, I'm talking to Rachel Jambo. They're coming from Amnesty International Zimbabwe around the issue of child marriage in Zimbabwe. What can be done to end child marriages? Hope you guys are enjoying the discussion. Maybe lastly, Rachel, over to you on the issue of what can be done now. What can you say to the church? What can you say to traditional leaders? What can you say to society in terms of the child marriages? I know sometimes, at times we see kids are marrying each other or marrying the older people. Keep quiet in society. So what can you say to them as someone who's working with young people, young girls there, and also child marriages issues?
Okay, thank you. So I think my first point of call is whether we are wanting to be in touch with reality or not, our young people are engaged in sexual activities, and we need to put measures in place to protect them. An injustice to the girl child is an injustice to future generations, and it is stealing the girl child's future. The prerogative is on you as church leaders, as community leaders, as parents, as guardians in different spaces to take a stand, to call out child marriages for what they really are. Child marriages are rape. Child marriages are gender-based violence. Child marriages need to be ended.
Rachel, thank you so much for your time, for joining us this morning on the CITE View, talking about child marriages.
Thank you so much, Brighton. It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, that was the voice of Rachel Jambo, the Gender and Intersectional Justice Campaigns Officer from Amnesty International Zimbabwe, speaking to us about child marriages. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Please do follow them on Twitter as well. They are there as Amnesty International Zimbabwe. To follow CITE on Twitter, we are there as CITE View, and to follow all of us on our platforms, on different various platforms. So you guys enjoyed the discussion this morning. From myself, Brighton Ncube, it's bye for now.